Hello there and welcome to the latest edition of the SME Soup podcast, brought to you by Rakbank Business. My name is Richard Dean. I'm a journalist based in Dubai, and today we're tackling a topic that we get so many questions on: SME funding, challenges and opportunities. So we got a banker in the house today to answer all of these questions. My pleasure to welcome to the podcast the Managing Director of Business Banking at Rakbank, Dhiraj Kunwar. Dhiraj, how are you?
Great, and thank you, Richard. Glad to be here.
Good to have you with us. Lots of questions for you. Also asking the questions today, glad to have Tom Baxendale with us, Head of Digital Business Banking at Rakbank. Tom, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Right then, let's jump straight into this, Dhiraj. Let's begin broad. We'll go narrow in a minute. Let's go broad to narrow. How would you characterise the current landscape of small business financing here in the UAE?
Look, Richard, if you see the SME financing landscape globally, it follows a particular trend. So if you are at an early stage startup, you tap into friend and family. As you grow, you tap into your private equity or venture capitalist. And as you go and have stable operation, you go and talk to your bank to raise traditional finance. And when you become really big, you tap into the primary market for equity or debt. That said, UAE is still at a nascent stage of a private credit market or private equity market. So there's a heavy reliance on the bank funding. So sadly though, the banks are still a very important player in the SME financing landscape. Though we have seen fintechs, we have seen small peer-to-peer lenders also setting shop and started doing well.
Okay, so that's the bigger picture. But in terms of access to funding for small businesses, that's what they care about. Are the taps open at the moment?
So for a bank like ourselves, we are one of the active players. Even a company has a 1 year of complete operation, welcome. But largely the funding is difficult for the early stage startups or even a company which has just started operation. Banks traditionally look at businesses which has a stable and sustainable cash flow for almost at least 2 or 3 years. But what is interesting now that you have peer-to-peer lenders, you have some fintechs which is providing you closed loop alternative finance solutions which was not there before. But as we go along, this has never been an easy question. This has remained a global problem forever. But what I can see in the UAE, there's a lot of willingness from the government and the financial participant to get things better for SMEs.
Well, I know, for example, we get small business owners writing into us, another journalist saying, why will my bank not lend me money? And I respond by saying, well, because a bank, it's not the bank's money, it's the bank's client's money. So banks are paid to be cautious. That's their job because it's other people's money. What do you say to that, Dhiraj?
Glad you said that. Normally, the popular perception is banks are unwilling to lend. And that's partly correct because some banks may not have the risk appetite to lend to SMEs given the very nature of business. You talk about vulnerability to the credit cycle, you talk about reliance or concentration of few buyers and suppliers. Banks traditionally like businesses which has stable and sustainable track record, which is not the case for many SMEs. Having said that, right now the banks are willing to support SMEs because the market has become stable. You see a demand side doing very well for last 3 to 4 years. So I will say, considering last 3 to 4 years, I think banks have become much more open to the idea of SME funding.
So we're in this progressive environment, right? And on a day-to-day basis, me and you are sort of working towards greasing the wheels for SMEs. But obviously, startups, very early startups, have a challenge with getting access to financing. What are some of those challenges that SMEs face?
So continuing to where we just started, that if you look from the bank's perspective, right, banks are committed to pay back their depositor. So in the process, they cannot lend to an idea which is good for an equity holder, but may not be a good for a bank which is in debt business. Right? And why it is so? Because there is very high mortality rate in small business. Right? And for the reasons that we discussed already,
I think it's about 90%, right? It's in line with global.
Correct. So only 90% survive the first 12 months, right? And as you progress, the rate gets better. But the challenge is that what are the alternate source of financing that we as community can create, right? A lot of countries have experimented with the idea of credit guarantee schemes. UAE has also launched the credit guarantee scheme from their development banks. That is one very good idea. The second idea is what we call a government supported equity model, which is very prevalent in Singapore. That government put in small equity and then the other participant join in later. So those ideas can make this market much more investor friendly, where startups and SMEs can come and set the shop here.
Well, let's talk about fintech. You've mentioned it a couple of times, Dhiraj. Where do we stand with fintech here in the UAE? What do we already have? And if we look at what's available globally, Singapore you mentioned, the United States, what do we not have yet in the UAE? Where are we with fintech for small businesses?
Right. So there are some interesting fintech concepts. The couple of ones which are active on the lending space are primarily against their merchant finance. So if you are a retailer, you have POS receivable, they will assign those and give you funding against that. There is also a decent peer-to-peer lender, which is now partly owned by the big telecom giant. They have also started approaching the market from a different angle, raise money from the public and lend back to the SMEs. But in terms of scale and impact, they're still small. Right? The owners and the scale is still with the banks. But as we get into the open finance, the banking data will get democratized, and you will see far many players from the fintech community tapping to this opportunity. And what does it mean to the banks like us? That we have to partner them, because banks are not particularly good at everything. So if you can get the CX and UX of a fintech and the risk model of a bank, that's the partnership we are working on to get life easier for our fellow SMEs.
Well, Tom, can I throw a question at you? I know you're here to ask the questions
today,
fire away. But we're in the field of digital banking, and this is your field as well. What's out there on the horizon that we haven't got here yet, but we might have in 2 or 3 years' time when it comes to funding solutions for small businesses? What do you see over the horizon?
So from a digital platform perspective, Dhiraj has obviously touched on the largest crowdfunding platform that's here, but what is coming or sort of an area that needs to be advanced is an aggregation type play. We haven't seen a lot of that for lending to small businesses. So imagine a platform where you go and loans from different banks, different fintechs, different players are all aggregated onto one platform, and you can choose the type of loan that you want. Essentially, though, all of these sort of fintechs and different propositions are good for SMEs because ultimately they don't have to give equity away. So that's one of the primary problems with an SME going for financing. If they go to a VC firm or if they go for private equity, they have to give away part of their business in order to get the money. What we're trying to do at Rakbank is to provide that, and your company stays your company.
And I guess the good news, if we look at it in terms of the evolution of fintech, when we speak to guys about venture capital money in the Middle East, and where's that venture capital money going, it's mainly fintech. Yeah, there's agri-tech is popular at the moment, there's health tech. The money is going into fintech startups. Now, they may be early stage at the moment, so they're not going to be active at scale for a few years yet. But that's the first stage, isn't it? The fintechs are getting funded by the VC guys. So I guess there's a bit of hope there for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours, and I'm not here to answer all the questions. You're here to answer them. But for me, it's a data gap, right? So banks are cautious. They want to understand the company. They want to see the transactions and the balance sheets and all of that data in order to lend. If we had that data up front and we understood the company, then we would be able to lend a lot earlier. And I think we're getting access to that information now. The government is helping. There's a lot more richness to the data available, which will allow us to lend a lot earlier, so you don't have to give away part of your company.
Good stuff. Tom, sorry, I've hijacked your questioning. I know you got a lot of questions for Dhiraj as well.
No, it's okay. So obviously, our day-to-day is opening hundreds and thousands of business accounts. Can you share any, maybe not in particular the names, but success stories from some of our customers at Rakbank?
See, I have been in this market for close to 1.5 decades. And of course, I have seen many success stories. I have also seen some of not so successful stories. I can think about a single polyclinic back in the 2007. Now it is one of the giant of healthcare industry. I've seen a small shop in Dera, electronic shop. Now they are one of the biggest retailers in GCC. And then we have also seen a good business models faltering down the line. But if you see what is different between two cohorts, it's not about the business acumen, and it's not even about the access to finance, sadly. It is about the integrity, it is about the ability to plan and execute, and above all, their perseverance and resilience to fight all odds. That differentiate between a very successful enterprise and not so successful ones. And it's true for even small businesses.
And in your vast experience of seeing all of these businesses coming through, have you seen a change in trend of the types of businesses that are now here versus, say, 10 years ago?
So one change that you clearly see is in the demographic itself, right? The big daddies have passed on the baton. The young guys are running the shop. And what it does, it changes the approach, the way they look at their business, right? They're more tech savvy, they're willing to experiment with alternate source of data, alternate source of funding. But what it also does, that they moved away from the traditional mercantile trade to the service-based economy. So if you see what's growing in the UAE is the service side of the economy. Consumption is stable, the trading will remain trading, but where we see most of the capital coming is in the technology space, is in the services space, is in the logistics space, and all the tech, whether you talk real tech, wealth tech, health tech.
Yeah.
So there we are seeing a lot of investments.
So just to pick up on that point, if it's more services based, by definition that is less asset based, and banks traditionally like lending against assets. You know, if someone comes to you and says, I want to buy a new ship for my shipping company, great, there's an asset there. Happy days. Services is slightly different to my perception. How accurate is that, Dhiraj?
I think you're spot on. When the dynamics of business changes, the banks also need to change their business model. So if we were comfortable back in the days to lend against assets, because those days you had more asset heavy and more trading based businesses. You can see the inventory and fund. But if you're talking about lending against intellectual property, if you're talking about lending against a service cash flow, it's a different ball game. We as Rakbank, we do understand the value of service economy, and our lending policies are aligned to encourage a more services company to come and ask debt. And guess what? You lend against the sustainable cash flow. Ultimately, your debt gets paid by cash flow more than selling off those assets.
So let's talk about how these small businesses can become more bankable. You get a lot of applications for loans, all the banks do. What do small businesses have to do to get themselves, if not at the front of the queue, but to just get to a yes from their bank?
That was expected from you, and we have discussed this multiple times. Look, and this is something that we discussed last time as well. If you treat your compliance as a cost and not as an investment, you will not be more bankable. So you have to invest in the compliance and the governance of the business. That remains the key. Right?
Yeah, but that's quite boring for a small business owner, isn't it?
Understandable.
Investing in compliance is not going to set the pulse racing, is it, Dhiraj?
I agree with you. But as in life, so many good things are boring. But you've got to do it because it's important to make your business sustainable. All we are saying that the SMEs will always be vulnerable to credit cycles, right? So you can't change the inherent risk of the business. But what you can do is how do you engage with your lender? How do you engage with your business partner? And if you govern your business, it is only going to help the businesses getting more sustainable. So if you ask me, being bankable is a byproduct of being sustainable. And I can give you an easy answer. If you want to be more bankable, just bank with Rakbank.
Oh, there you go. We'll allow you that plug. But in terms of things that people can do, practical steps, okay, small business owner or managers watching this, getting your accounts in order, I would imagine that is step one. I mean, if you haven't got your accounts in order, then good luck going to a bank. But what else can you do? Improve your accounts, get better accounts? What are the things? Because it's not just about the audit in the accounts, is it?
That's very interesting one. And sometimes, and we do advise our customers that if you actually see the empirical data, there are more companies faltered because excess financing than because lack of financing. So financing is not the only issue. Issue is how do you manage your capital? Everybody wants a customer, but you need a paying customer, not just a customer. Everybody wants growth, but you need a profitable growth, not only growth. As long as you get this equation right, and you can only get this equation right if you have proper bookkeeping, if you have proper management reports, and in this days, this is not very costly. You have all cloud-based accounting software, you have subscription-based services which can help your businesses. So today, you have far more tools than you had 5 years before to invest and to monitor your business on a real-time basis.
So you don't need a Big Four audit?
You don't. And in fact, what you need is books of accounts. Whether it is audited or not, as long as you are honest about your business, audit is a formality and audit is a requirement when you get bigger. But the first step is to have a proper record keeping of your operations.
To what extent has that improved over the past few years? We've had VAT now in the UAE for what, 6 or 7 years now, and that forced a lot of companies, I mean, they had to have accounts. Even before it was just, stack of receipts, maybe an Excel spreadsheet, they had to get some kind of software. Now we've got corporate tax, again, the obligation to report to the government is there. My sense would be that has raised the bar in terms of how people document their finances. Again, how accurate is that?
Spot on. We had a workshop multiple times, and you have been there in some of these webinars. The tax and VAT has definitely improved the level of disclosure and level of compliance. And you'll be surprised when we do a small group workshops, we are talking about 9% corporate tax here. If you do a proper bookkeeping and if you have a proper governance around it, you may save more than 9% cost just by properly monitoring your operations. So when you are working in a taxed economy, the first thing that it does is that it improves the quality of disclosure. The quality of disclosure means you're more bankable. Quality of disclosure also means you now know many avenues to make more money and save more money because you have proper bookkeeping. So I think all in all, it's good step in the direction, and particularly for SMEs, it is good thing in long run.
So back to your mantra that compliance is an investment, not a cost.
Absolutely.
We should get mugs made, T-shirts or something with that on
Absolutely,
it.
absolutely.
And like I said before, this provides another data point for us as banks, right? So this is an audited data point which allows us to sort of ingest that information and make the onboarding or the access to finance a lot easier through our digital journeys. So we're not asking more questions, we're not asking for physical documents, we're not asking for signatures for many, many things. We can pull a government database, and that's one step out of 10 that we need.
But do we still need that meeting with a banker to get signed off on a corporate loan? So much is becoming digitized, but do you still need a human, a banker, to analyze the business, to meet the executives, to get a sense of what's going on, maybe even visit the premises, kick the tires, whatever it may be? Digitization is great. Tom, I'm sure you do a fabulous job, but there's still a role for the banker. How do you balance those two, Dhiraj?
So I think I'll probably split this question in 3 parts. Is this digital consent acceptable as per law of the land in the UAE? Yes. Right? Have we graduated that consent and digital signature is widely practiced in the country? Started happening. Still some time to go. But the third point is the most interesting one. Digitization of journey is not a replacement of the physical contact between a client and a banker privilege. What you get having coffee with your clients is not the insight you'll get from the data. Because SME business is not all about data. It is about data, but it's also about understanding the psyche, understanding the value system, understanding and have the touch and feel of the business itself. So I'm all for digitization, but with human touch.
Digital bank with a human touch.
Oh, very good. Yeah, well, we're definitely going to get mugs with that one printed on. They have already been printed, haven't they? Tom, I'm going to give you the last question. You're the digital guy,
Sure.
So you can ask the future question.
So, we've talked about access to financing and all of the things related to that. What is beyond financing for SMEs? What additional support do they require so that they can thrive in the UAE?
See, the biggest problem statement in the prize is to solve the banking problem itself. Once you solve that, all the neighborhood possibilities are infinite. If you talk about a single SME owner today, they get all the services from a fragmented individual consultant or brokers. You may have one consultant for audit, you may have one broker for PR services, one for digital marketing. So while it may be a good idea for cost control, but it is not going to move your business to the next level. So what the participants globally are trying to do is trying to aggregate those services, particularly for the bank like us who has the scale advantage. I can render those services at much cost efficient way and a consistent way because I can get you a very credible partner at a cheaper cost. So that is something that we are building. I think SME Souk is our attempt to create the ecosystem for SMEs where they can do what they need at a much cheaper cost from a credible player. Long way to go, but that is how the market is moving.
That's a nice line on which to end, so we'll leave it there. Tom, first of all, my thanks to you. Tom Baxendale, Head of Digital Business Banking at Rakbank. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And to you, Dhiraj Kunwar, Managing Director, Business Banking at Rakbank. Always a pleasure. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Richard.
That is it for this episode of the SME Souk podcast, brought to you by Rakbank Business. Do join us for the next one.